Okay, everyone, welcome to this evening's event, which is, of course, a reading and discussion of the work of Bhanu Kapil, and I'm delighted to introduce this. Bhanu is a leading practitioner of experimental creative writing. She works between poetry, prose, and performance, and with a strong interest in text-image relations. Her work is led by ethical and political commitments to feminism, anti-racism, the critique of colonialism and its legacies, and to environmental justice. Over the last year, her distinguished contribution has been recognized through a series of awards: the Wyndham Campbell Prize for Poetry from Yale, the Chumley Award of the Society of Authors, the Poetry Book Society Choice, and featuring in the National Poetry Day selection. Now, Churchill has been very fortunate to host Bhanu as an artist bifellow over the last year during her tenure of the Judith E. Wilson Fellowship at the Faculty of English. And we're all the happier that we've been able to extend her bifellowship for another year. While Churchill, of course, has a leaning towards STEM, Bhanu is the latest embodiment of the college's commitment to artistic practice and to literature in particular. The college has Nobel laureates Wole Soyinka and Mario Vargas Llosa as honorary fellows, and leading Australian environmentalist poet John Kinsella as a fellow. And we host the John Kinsella and Tracy Ryan Poetry Prize and the Other Prize for outstanding writing in poetry and in other writing. I think that Bhanu's writing nicely bridges poetry and other forms of writing. It challenges conventional categories of form and content, and makes us think and feel in other ways about important subjects. Now, Bhanu's going to read from her latest publication, How to Wash a Heart, which is concerned with migration and hospitality. This, of course, was advertised, but we've got a bonus in also a reading of part of her latest book, which has a connection to Hildegard von Bingen, which Bhanu perhaps will explain to us. So following the reading, there'll be an opportunity for you to submit questions to Bhanu through Zoom's Q&A facility. The questions will come to me and I'll relay them to her, so I read them out for the benefit of everybody. So on that note, over to you, Bhanu.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for introducing me. And thank you to Churchill College for making this dramatic nest for me this afternoon. I am delighted to participate and contribute to this alumni festival. So I can't see you, but I can feel you out there, participants. And this reading is for you. I thought I would read from my new book, How to Wash a Heart, which I edited on the campus of Churchill College. Perhaps campus is not quite the correct word. The grounds, sitting on benches and in the Shepherd Flats. And perhaps there's a way that I could think about how the place that one is in, as one is curating, distilling, working out the detritus of a first draft, how that happens in one place differently than it might in another. But I thought I would also, once I've read a little bit of this book, also read from a new work, which is an introductory story of a book that is being published today, Unknown Language, from Ignota Books in London, which is a novel by Hugh Lemmy, and I have written the introduction in the form of science fiction. And this science fiction was very much inspired by my time at Churchill College, which is ongoing. I attended lectures at the Kavli Institute for Cosmology and had the just wonderful pleasure of talking to all sorts of students and radical others about time, about what it is to be a body otherwise. So more on that bonus Hildegard shortly, and it is her feast day today as well. So, okay, I'm going to have a sip of water from my kimchi jar from a local Cambridge kimchi purveyor. 1 minute. Great. And I'm just looking at the time. I'm going to hope to read somewhere between 20 minutes and half an hour, leaving about 20 minutes or so for questions. Right then. How to wash a heart. Like this. It's inky early outside and I'm wearing my knitted scarf like John Betjeman, poet of the British past. I like to go outside straight away and stand in the brisk air. Yesterday, you vanished into those snowflakes like the ragged beast you are. Perhaps I can write here again, a fleeting sense of possibility, K, keywords, hospitality, stars, jasmine, privacy. You made a space for me in your home, for my books and clothes, and I'll never forget that. When your adopted daughter, an Asian refugee, as you described her, came in with her coffee and perched on the end of my cot, I felt so happy and less like a hoax. Showed her how to drink water from the bowls on the windowsill. I don't want to beautify our collective trauma. Your sexual brilliance resided, I sometimes thought, in your ability to say, no matter the external circumstances, I am here. From this place, you gave only this many desiccated fucks about the future. Day by day, you discovered what happiness is. As your guest, I trained myself to beautify our collective trauma. When night fell at last, I turned with a sigh towards the darkness. I am about to squeeze out an egg, you murmured, as you kissed me goodnight. Hold a funeral for the imagination, I thought. To my left is a turquoise door, and to my right, a butcher's table. Above you is a heart beating in the snow. When I described the set of my play, an environment more vivid to me than the memory of my childhood home, your face turned green. What made you know something was over? The milk in your eyes scared me. In that moment, I understood that you were a wolf capable of devouring my internal organs if I exposed them to view. Sure enough, the image of a heart carved from the body appeared in the next poem you wrote. There's a bright call of fire and cream as I write these words, stretching out these early spring or late winter mornings with coffee and TV. I don't remember the underneath, everything I will miss when I die. It's exhausting to be a guest in somebody else's house forever, even though the host invites the guest to say whatever it is they want to say. The guest knows that host logic is variable. Prick me and I will cut off the energy to your life. How to wash a heart. Remove it. Animal or ice. The curator's question reveals their power style. If power implies relationship, then here we are, at the part where even if something goes wrong, that's exactly how it's meant to be. Your job is to understand what the feedback is. It's such a pleasure to spend time outside the house. There's nowhere to go with this except begin, to plunge my forearms into the red ice that is already melting. in the box. My spiritual power was quickly depleted by living with you. Like an intrusive mother, you cared for my needs, but also I never knew when you might open my door, leaving it open when you left. My identity as a writer was precarious during the time I lived with you. Once you locked me in, an accident, my spine against a tree when I dreamed that night. Contact nature on all fours, said the counselor, slipping off her chair onto the floor. Help me to repair what is broken and immortal. Is that the bin? I come from a country all lime pink on the soggy map. Destroy me, my soul whispered. Eat me, bones and all. Crush me in a vise. Stop me from walking out that door. The balloon deity I made from the condom on the floor was purgative, revolting, brilliant. Her lips were pursed. It doesn't matter that you made so many mistakes, she said. Violence rots the brain. Go. I do not enjoy eating too much. It's so painful. The only remedy is the bitter herb that grows by a rushing brook. Oils, sugars, pearls, crushed diamonds, linens and songs populate your crappy cabinets. Make a list of what you need and I will get it, you ungrateful cow. This is what I need. The light and the heat and the yesterday of my work. A candle on the wonky table at dusk. How time migrates. The chalky blue flowers. I need something that burns as slowly as that. Because living with someone who is in pain requires you to move in a different way. You bang the cup down by my sleepy head. That was the opening suite of poems from my How to Wash a Heart, which is inspired by a strange photograph I saw in a newspaper in Northern California of a citizen's host who had invited a guest, an immigrant guest, into their home. And perhaps I can say more about that afterwards if there's time, but that's phase one of this poetry reading. Okay, I'm going to invoke Hildegard of Bingen now, which I felt she came in at the end. There was a bitter herb growing by a brook, and I was reading in my research about the cowslip and amethyst tonics that Hildegard would ferment or likely toast before submerging in various sacks and putting them in rivers. And so I feel like the bitter herb at the end of that group of poems is something that I can nibble on in order to get to the next part, which is science fiction and Churchill College. I'm going to have to read directly from my screen because I don't have the book in my hands yet. And so I really hope I haven't made you disappear. Where are you? Okay. Okay. All right. Another sip of the kimchi water. So my story is called Pinky Agarwalya, Biography of a Child Saint in 10 Parts. And I don't know if any of you are part of the Churchill STEM community, but much of the vocabulary came, as I said, from my time at the Institute of Astronomy and in conversation with the radical others of Churchill College. So Here we go. Pinky Agarwalya, Biography of a Child Saint in 10 parts. And I'll read as many as I can get to in the next 10 minutes or so. 1. The lore of the fragment was what brought us together, like wasps licking a wooden frame to build their nests. Actually, just have to interrupt my story. That line is inspired by a gentleman who came to investigate the wasp problem in the Shepherd Flats. We thought that the wasps would sting us, but he said that no, they are magnetized by the wooden elements of this modernist, brutalist architecture, and that they carry it in their mouths back to their nests. So that's literally inspired by the Shepherd Flats. 1. The lore of the fragment was what brought us together, like wasps licking a wooden frame to build their nests. Each time we heard the story, we took some of it back in our mouths, like damp chemicals or pulp plus saliva, then spat it out to fill a hole or make the walls stronger. I am new to writing. Is the notebook a time crystal? Mother. Behind the curtain of blood, I saw a shape. That shape was an equation, constellation. What happens when we experience the mother's love? Father. I saw a terrible thing. It was after the war, a mother on the ground, her baby rooting for milk, suckling her, even though. Is the mother a gap on the physical level that links human beings together in a sense of united loss? Tried to get these questions out, can't focus. Mother, what would you like to feel? Father, get me tea and the paper. These are examples of communal lore, how we were when we were together and what it was like when we were apart. Also, orange grasses, foxglove, conifer, mango, dolphin, bitch. I heard a story of a mother and father who loved each other so much they had an operation to remove the hearts from their bodies, then sew them into each other's parts. It must have been so chilly, like an eclipse made visible only when photographed, when the time came to lift the organs out with a powerful single movement and give them to a nurse. I tell her that rocks like meteorites retain light, a sensible energy thought into substance by experiencing it, writes the poet of another era, putting forward an idea of writing that resembles transcription, connection with a reader, but also loss, a scrawl, a scribble. I'm no saint. 2. I want to live a simple, beautiful life with memories and friends. I do not want to die of carotid ill health or by the hand of another. In stating what I want and what I do not want, I practice a form of positive desire, the spirituality of a bygone era. Imagine a February morning in 1997 or 2019, the bright green grass and the 10 black ravens hopping across the lawn on the outskirts of a city filled with knaves, dolls, bears, and gymnasts, but also clerics who abandoned their calling to become what we all were in the end, a ruined self, now gone. Something happened. If an ancestor is someone you can still tell a story of, then perhaps I'm not a descendant. On the planet of Vars, where a city once was, is now a hole. Imagine a house bursting into flames in the rearview mirror of a yellow and black taxi. At the rim of this hole, are low hills or mounds, forest green and gleaming with bouncy eyes, rat, lion, piglet, boar, cat, dog, snake, cow, sheep, rabbit, horse. Ex-zoo. This is less a wilderness than the end of cages. Here, the lion eats the horse, the snake bites the dog, and the rat nips at the heel of the cow. Can animals save us, or will it be the plants who become conscious, adept, empathetic, the functional adults of our universe? To answer these questions, I left my home for the rim. I was a child, and perhaps I'm still a child. Lick a rose for its dew, wash your face when it rains, don't drink from the tap, I know what to do. 3. Imagine reincarnating as a sea creature. Imagine reincarnating in 1993 if you were born in 2023 or 2121 if you were born in 2021. Can we reincarnate in a society or an ocean that precedes us in the timeline of A, antiquity, or B, apocalypse? Imagine the shattered turquoise or aquamarine shard of the fresco underfoot. Imagine family time. Turns out the apocalypse is boring and sensible, a combination of sugars, fats, and trying to come up with a cunning plan. My suicide is more beautiful than your life, murmurs father on the floor of the stable, where he has curled up in the place where horses once lay to take his pills. If you are reading these words in the last century, I understand that you loved a film called Melancholia, starring Kiefer Sutherland. If you were reading these words in the coming century, Kiefer Sutherland was a loser poet. He was not a friend to his daughter or wife. Another planet appeared in the sky, a charged form of nudity that illuminated the siblings in the film, as well as the parent-child bond. Who is reading these words? Who is your partner in life? Was the person who saved our planet a devoted scientist who made room for new feelings in the space between their body and yours? What saved us in the end? Was it food? Meanwhile, the sun evolves every single day into something else, something further from sun. Because I was not part of a group, I knew that sexual trauma was a likelihood. This is why I had to leave. Like a vector, I passed the countryside, nibbling stream mint, cowslip, lily, and dill to survive. There's lots that happens in this story, but I think I'm going to skip ahead to a section. I'm going to read 2 more sections. One, because I can see it has snowdrops in it. One of the most beautiful things about living on the grounds of Churchill College, well, it was galantine. Galantine is a compound, as you know probably, that is held in the bulbs of daffodils. I knew that, but I did not know also that snowdrops also fester, that's the wrong word, emerge, wrong word again, in the bulbs of the snowdrops. Galantine is there as well. And I participated in an event at the Tate last autumn and had the good fortune to, I can't remember her name suddenly, but we can find it online afterwards. But someone gave a talk before my own poetry reading for Mal Journal, I think it was, talking about the compound galantine and lucid dreaming and its therapeutic use. And then late January or early February, it happened. There's a dell just at the end of Churchill College, just before you go up into the footpaths towards the observatory. And it's this beautiful arboretum or hollow or dell filled with snowdrops. And so sometimes I'd go out there and stand on the icy grass, imagining that this compound was coming up through the soles of my feet. And at night, when I fell asleep, less than 20 steps from the dell, I imagined that my dreams perhaps were altered by proximity. So it's a long way to say there's going to be some snowdrops, so watch out. And also, yes, there's a bunch of carrots. Ludwig Wittgenstein's house, 76 Stories Way, the back garden becomes an orchard that is part of Churchill College. And so one day I saw a bunch of carrots that had been unearthed from the student garden, and I believe those carrots are also in this. Okay, so I'm going to read this section and then one more. And it also, I see, has this content in this piece about a 6-dimensional object. If this was in person, I would love to meet you if you know more about the 6-dimensional object. But anyway, that's also coming up. Okay. I've dehydrated myself from talking so much about snowdrops and astral dreaming, but I'm going to have another sip. 7. There are forests here and snowdrops in abundance. I never imagined being here. Did you? From agar, from flock, from lovers, from bodies that flush with warmth, from the cultural memory of lighthouses, polar bears, the revolutionary nature of young people all over the earth, something was preserved. I can feel it here for the first time with you. Imagine a bunch of carrots with soil still caked on them, green tops like ferns, or imagine the sound of a wooden flute beyond the Mughal labyrinth. Imagine the national flowers of contested regions. Every person who traveled here is unsteady. I can feel that. Dehydrated. If home is found on both sides of the globe, home is of course here, and always a missed land, said the poet, with whom we can still feel an emotional affinity, though he is long gone. The delicate works of that earlier time will never be kept on record now. It is up to us to memorize them, poems by people who have been incarcerated, poems by people who left their homes, poems constructed with paper and string, things that happened, things that might happen on the planet of Vase. Here is the fragment. Pinky Agarwaliya gestures to a chunk of ice on the tall wooden table, addressing the group. The ice is luminous, almost neon, rotating to the left, then back again, twitching, without any effort or contact from Pinky herself or the members of her audience who are seated on the floor or leaning against the sides of the cave. These others are young, mostly teenagers. In the cave, their basic spectral features meet the dim light and the radiance of the fragment to exert a colloidal volume, facial expressions moving from child to child with the mobility and speed of fast-running water. As you can see, continues Pinky in a formal tone, the fragment is a 6-dimensional object that we have to integrate. It's evolving. We don't have much time. The ice has a lower luminosity than what it contains, And so the light from the fragment crosses two frequencies like an unknown language. Some photons can't escape the staggered mesh. How will we melt this ice that does not melt when we heat it or crack when we smash it on the ground? Pinky taps the book. 8. And this is the last piece I'll read. An unknown language is a rose meteor because what doesn't ebb off leaves lines. An unknown language is held in a quasi-steady state until someone reads it for the first time. Then it becomes toroidal, streaming lines. An unknown language is non-dimensional, and so it can't be written down. So what are you looking at? You need a code to look at the unknown language. Encased in ice, a word vibrates. Discontinuous spikes pulse in the body of the viewer. It helps to wear damp silk. The coolness calms the vagus nerve, a nerve that wraps around the heart as it travels from gut to brain. The fragment of an unknown language is unstable, convective, buoyant, and can't be extracted, just as the real universe can't be plotted. Is the one you love a proxy for radiance, Hildegard, the chameleon? Is the fragment a cosmological simulation, Hildegard, who ingested galantine, converting the energy of her life into an identity as bright as 6 billion suns? An unknown language comes from a foreign place, like a sample of the life once lived there. An unknown language is a very rich source, a repository of shared information like an amethyst cave at the place where the river meets the sea. Herbs and bodywork relieve the buildup of tension, Hildegard, off message. Hildegard, you were so close to me at the origin of rivers and then in the cave. Was it you who were so recently there, stoking the fire with the toe of your pointed boot? Hildegard, your metamorphosis like an animal or fish keeps slipping through my hands. I follow your command. That's it. I think I will, I shall pause there.
Well,
stop there.
I'll clap for everybody else because I don't think we'll hear anyone else clap. I'm sure they are. Everybody's applauding in their own spaces. But Bhanu, thanks for reading such beautiful work and for reading it so beautifully indeed. And I'm sure everyone has really enjoyed that opportunity to come into your writing world through those two works. And perhaps at this point, I would invite everybody to use the Q&A function to put a question in, which I can then relay to Bhanu. But I guess maybe I'll begin if I may. And I'm interested because I know you do quite a lot of performance work, and I said you read beautifully. And to just be a bit more precise, I suppose what interests me about your kind of poetry is the relationship it has to reading out, really. So, or to put it another way, maybe you could tell us something about the writing process and the extent to which the articulation of the work on the page comes also from a kind of readiness for it to be read out, or maybe that's part of your process. And could you maybe say something about that?
Yes. Thank you, Andrew. The first, I noticed I felt very differently reading from the two works. One is in a book, it has covers, and the other is, just published today. One I edited and thought about, over the winter, and the other one is more recent. So I surprised myself by feeling so differently, like inside myself as I read the two works. And I also heard for the first time the way that the two texts, I use the word nibble. I could hear the threads, or that the work with ice, continues. But in terms of performance, perhaps it's not evident, when I read from the work. But the first piece that I read from the book, that was originally a performance installation at ICA London, a collaboration with my sister Rahini, a visual artist. And so the poems derive from the memory of that performance. So I can hear all of that, but I don't know how well it's communicated just in a reading. But as I read, I can remember being in that space. So it's a source of nurturance, if that's a word, or strength, or I can remember my own experience even as I'm reading, through the persona or the voice of this host-guest dynamic. So a lot is going on internally as I read, and I've trained myself to pay attention to that interoceptive experience, because it helps me to keep writing, or it helps me to develop the work, which is not held in the book. The work is not the same thing as the book. So that's a little bit about how performance and imagery, happen differently in a book than they might in a performance. And that's something to do with poetry, but it's also something to do with what it is to live one's life as a writer, and to keep remembering that, because it turns out you need physical courage to keep writing books. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Bhanu. So we've got a couple of questions. So I'll start with Josh Jacobs, who says, thanks for this wonderful reading, and asks, what inspires you when writing, looking at future times or looking back at the present from a potential future?
Thank you. And that's from
Josh.
Josh. Thank you, Josh, for your question. The first thing, and can't remember if I read from that section in the second piece that I read. It's this communication that becomes possible between an ancestor and a descendant. So that's what I found most interesting as I kind of worked out this imaginary. It allowed me to ask questions about devastation that were querulous, that were moody, that held emotional pain, when I asked them. And that comes from the work of Joanna Macy, the work that reconnects. So I wanted to think about a practice that I've encountered in the aftermath of social violence in the United States in particular. Large groups that want to find a way to speak to each other, speak to communities, their own communities, just to think together about ecological devastation, social violence mixed together. And so this is a practice where there's a facilitator who speaks, who asks questions embodied by a descendant, and two people face each other, and the facilitator is speaking. People are sitting in dyads, in a large space or a room. And this is actually a practice I did in the Judith E. Wilson Drama Studio with students there last year. So you're hearing a question and you're speaking to an ancestor, and then the person who's facing you, that person speaks then as the ancestor, the person of the present time, answering questions from that potential future, you could say. So I enjoyed thinking about that practice and trying to work it out in fiction, and also attending talks at the Institute of Astronomy. I saw that there were two ways to think about the future, one through observations, and the other, there were several talks on, simulations. So I began to think of fiction or prose or poetry as well, this kind of hybrid work, as something analogous to a simulation. So I'm still thinking about what my next science fiction work will be, but it's definitely something that I want to keep connected to and keep thinking about. Thank you for your question, Josh, wherever you are.
We've got another question from anonymous attendee who says, could you tell us more about Pinky Agarwalya? Does she have other poetic lives? Also, I was struck by the idea of the mother linking us united in loss. Can you say more about this?
Yes. I was born in England. I was born in Hillingdon Hospital under a cedar of Lebanon many years ago. And for the first part of my life, I grew up in Hayes. So Northwest London, Southall, Hayes, it's where many immigrant communities from the Punjabi diaspora, Pakistani and Indian diaspora landed. So after that, we moved to Ruislip after an event in our neighborhood. So one way that I can talk about Pinky Agarwalya is to say that I began writing stories in Hayes, which is not a very likely place for somebody to become a writer. George Orwell actually taught English there in Mellow Lane Grammar School, where, on the side note, I did once win a Scottish dancing competition in a four. So if you can imagine 1970s little Bhanu writing these stories about Pinky Agarwalya, a Punjabi heroine. But Agarwalya is not really a common Punjabi name. It's usually Agarwal. So I sort of mutated and said Agarwalya. And then when I was about 11 and a half or 12, I saw like competition, for £50, you can send in your entry to this national competition, send in the first 3 chapters of your novel, and you'll get critical feedback from the judges, and maybe you could win and become like a British novelist. And I set to work. I wrote 3 very rich chapters set in the aftermath of a nuclear disaster, Pinky Agarwalya, the heroine, and sent it off. And about 3 months later, got a very long letter from the judges letting me know that I was not, nor would I ever be, a novelist, and that it was basically the most rubbish thing they'd ever come across in their whole entire lives. So ever since that time, I have been dreaming alongside and with Pinky Agarwalya. I once wrote just a small play and acted it out with my friends. So it was very, very satisfying when, Ignota Books invited me to contribute to this volume. And Granta actually last week published a section of my work, and I felt it was true vindication, both for me and Pinky. So that is the origin story of Pinky Agarwalya. And also to say, maybe I'm not widely read enough, but I don't know that there's a lot of Punjabi science fiction. So it's very satisfying to have somebody with this particular name whizzing around in her aluminium ball gown. I just made that up. And then there's a question about the mother linking us united in loss. Yeah, I think that part comes from just another part of my life, which is I'm also trained as a body worker. So in about 1998, I took a training and thought I write so much about the body. I want to learn more about the body. And I noticed at that time of my life that so many people were in physical pain. A family member had cancer and was soon to pass away. And touch was one of the only things, that helped them through particular, rough patches. And so I think a lot about who touches us and who doesn't touch us, and read different kinds of works about mothers. I'm very drawn to the work of Jacqueline Rose, for example, or Melanie Klein. So behind that line, I think I can see the orange and cream volume of Melanie Klein's writings on my bedside table. And there's, yes.
Sorry, I was just going to say that leads to the next question, I think, quite nicely. Perhaps we can move on to that. So, this is from Shalini Sengupta, who says, thank you for that beautiful reading. It's so evident when you read out your work that you intend your writing as a mode of care work, or nurturance, as you put it so beautifully. What is the relationship of this work to care, and hence continuity with what you were just saying? But could you say some more about that, maybe?
Yes, of course. Hello, Shalini. We have not met, I do not think, but it's very lovely that you're here in this space today. Hello. Yes, there's so much to speak to. I'm thinking, actually, Andrew, of how you introduced me today. As someone working in, I don't know, the intense present or aftermath of experiences of coloniality, of colonial time that are ongoing. So, so much of my work is about subjects or memories or family memories that are quite traumatic. So even there on the Hayes-Southall border, the work I was doing before this was really a way of recollecting and organizing the fragments precipitated by my early time in that neighborhood, which of course is no longer a neighborhood in the way that it once was. And so for a long time, I've been carrying the question, how will these fragments attract, so many fragments, so many shards, you could say. And then when I was researching the effect of social violence in the place that I had grown up in, and, beginning to think about, where was I? Who was I when I was not with others? Like, what was going on, with all the people around me? There was a lot of trouble in that neighborhood. There were very high rates of domestic violence. There were dowry burnings. This was the time when Southall Black Sisters, I think in 1979, was founded. And, then we abruptly left when our lives were impacted directly by the violence. So I found the work of Dinesh Bugra and Peter Jones, who work in the field of cross-cultural psychiatry. And I came upon this study in which I think they were Pakistani and Indian, like Punjabi group, people who had lived through partition and had come to the UK either in their 20s, but now who were a bit older. And this was a kind of part of a kind of thinking about the high rates of psychosis in these neighborhoods, and the thinking through, is it indexed to migration, or actually the finding was it's something to do with ethnic density. But in this study, it was about relocating this small group to a temple in India, but giving them secular work, meaning that they handled the utensils that pilgrims would bring to be rinsed out of milk and other offerings. And it's this idea that light touch and exchange in a communal setting and in a secular task is very regulating. So it had effects on the psyche and on, you could say, the mental health of the participants of this, study. So that really stayed with me, this idea of light touch, of being with others, about the secular. Maybe the frame is devotional, but yes, that was the start of beginning to think about care. And Shalini, I think you're asking something even more beautiful and even deeper. And perhaps one day, in the coming year, if that was possible, you could come to Churchill College and we could sit on the lawn and we could talk about these things in person. I would love that.
When touch is possible again as well, that would be nice. That would be nice. There's a question actually in the chat which has come from Ross Gray, who says, "Wonderful, thank you. Love to hear about the inspiration behind the lines. What do you find most inspiring about the college?" You've mentioned some inspirations, some kind of local inspirations.
Oh, yes. Well, I love, I don't even know how to begin, but it's just recently changed due to mushrooms, which I can go into, and Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Life, which I'm reading, and I have become obsessed with all of the mushrooms on the grounds of Churchill College. But really, it's been the Institute of Astronomy, just because of the proximity. There is the world's oldest atlas of the sky in a special room at the top. So for me, I should say the grounds of the Institute of the Astronomy, Churchill, the two things flow together. But the opportunity to speak to people about time, about blood, about empathy, about the way that things break down and then cohere, so that I am not, in this close work with fragments and coherence, producing a generic result. So that as an experimental writer, yes, the fragment is my medium, but also poetry is never a disciplinary home for me. So it's been wonderful to meet other people for whom their disciplinary home is also porous. And what that means is, it's sometimes in the start of being here, it was meeting lots of students at odd moments, sometimes on the bus, coming to and from the U bus. So I had lots of conversations, and at lunchtime, I discovered that if I sat with the students, some of whom were very shy, even more shy than me, I could just casually ask something about time, or there was a fantastic conversation I had about vertical threads with a computer science student. So that's the answer. It's somewhere between mushrooms and students. At the moment, mushrooms. But I will never forget going along every Thursday to the Kavli Institute in the company of Professor Alec Boxenberg, having a cup of tea, attending the lecture in such amazing company, all the top people there. And then afterwards, just standing around having the tiny bit of port or whatever it was, or more tea, and just being part of those conversations. I don't know that they understood that I was a poet, but I just wrote down everything I could, and there's so much more that I wish I could do over there. There's a room where the sun descends through a tiny aperture and is refracted. And I was on the verge of being able to visit that room, but it was not to be. Chance encounters and the grounds themselves. At the moment, I'm writing about the garden, the orchard, a collaboration with my sister, Bhanu Kapil. So that's going to be up, hosted by the Judith E. Wilson Drama Studio online. So I couldn't quite read from that today, but that's going to be about quite a long piece inspired by walking from that garden to Ludwig Wittgenstein's grave. And so just taking that walk, observations, refractions. Sorry, Russ, that was a bit of a ramble, but.
That's really interesting. So we can share that in due course so that people can get to hear, see that.
Yes.
So that's going to be a performance, and
yes, there'll be a live performance element. My sister, who's a visual artist, her work, she's done a lot of work in India, but also Miami, working with modernist architecture. So the architecture of the Shepherd Flats has been projected, and she's worked through painting and digital techniques. So it's going to be a hybrid of these images and kind of fruit from the orchard itself, as we call it. And then in this parallel way, there'll be my writing. At the moment it's called, I've got it here on my computer, Orchard Notes, I Walked to My Grave. So it's something about this idea of someone who dies in one place and is buried there. And yes, that's been a very important part of being here for me. And of course, John Kinsella's poem Orchids is sort of appended. Well, it keeps falling down, and I feel obliged to protect it. And I keep trying to put it up, and then it's currently with some pebbles on the side, hoping that someone can re-adhere it. But his poem, of course, is right there in the garden as well.
I think this is care work as well when you do that yes. Poem in the grounds of the college. So thanks very much, Bhanu. We should probably draw to a close, but it's great to know we have other things to look forward to. And I think this format, one of the things it's achieved, I think, is enable people there are people here from the USA, I think from other parts of the world. This is a global gathering of people with connection to the college, alumni and others. And so it gives a real opportunity to reach out in that way. And I hope that over the next year, there'll be further opportunities, both locally and reaching out to the global network of the college. Thanks, I'm sure we'd all want to, again, it's going to be silent and you have to imagine it, but I'm sure we'd all want to give you a very warm round of applause for your generosity, and thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Bye.